He ordered a quiet meal, but what they served him instead exposed a system built on silent exclusion. When Keanu Reeves was denied the respect every passenger deserved, he didn't raise his voice, he triggered something far more powerful. By the time the flight landed, the entire crew had no idea what was coming. Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The jet bridge was nearly empty by the time Keanu stepped onto the soft carpet, his boots making barely a sound. The rain from the tarmac still clung to the shoulders of his long black wool coat, dampening the fabric, but not his pace. No entourage, no assistants, no flashbulbs, just him. One hand in his coat pocket, the other adjusting the strap of a canvas bag that hung across his shoulder. It wasn't leather, wasn't branded. It had scuffs and seams, like it had seen more of the world than most people ever would. That was how he liked it. Up ahead, the first-class door of the aircraft stood open. Inside, golden lighting cast soft shadows on cream leather and brushed steel. The hum of a distant violin melody floated faintly from the cabin speakers. Keanu paused for just a second before stepping inside. He looked neither left nor right, just forward, as if he'd walked this path before 1,000 times and knew that what mattered wasn't the welcome, but what followed after. "Welcome aboard," said a young flight attendant stationed by the door. Her voice was tight, her smile thin and automatic. She didn't make eye contact. She turned quickly, almost instinctively, toward the man behind him. "Mr. Dalton, we're thrilled to have you back," she said, her tone brightening instantly. "We've prepared your usual sparkling water." Keanu said nothing. He wasn't surprised. The man behind him wore a tailored gray suit, his patient watch gleaming under the LED glow. She reached out for his carry-on, laughing politely at something he said, her posture opening up like she had just found the most important person on the plane. Keanu adjusted his bag and moved toward his seat 1 ampere. The best seat on the aircraft, front left, closest to the door, angled toward the window with maximum privacy. It was a seat reserved for celebrities, dignitaries, or CEOs who didn't like to wait. But tonight, it belonged to a man no one seemed to see. That was fine. It wasn't the first time he'd worn invisibility like a second coat. He opened the overhead bin gently, placed his canvas bag inside, and sat down with the grace of someone who knew how to move unnoticed. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. His eyes remained soft, neutral. But inside, he was cataloging everything. The seat felt familiar, wide and firm, finished in polished gray leather with white stitching. A silver reading lamp curved gently from the side, casting a pool of warm light onto the armrest. On the console, a touchscreen blinked softly. "Welcome, guest." No name, just the default greeting, even though the ticket had been purchased through his Diamond Tier account. Keanu didn't sigh. He simply reached into his coat, pulled out a small folded envelope, and placed it carefully into the seatback pocket in front of him. Then he closed his eyes. Not to rest, to listen. The hum of the cabin grew louder as more passengers began to board, their voices a blend of rehearsed laughter, clinking phones, and light perfume. A tray passed by champagne flutes balanced delicately on polished silver. The attendant didn't offer one to Keanu. She floated right past him like his seat was unoccupied. He opened his eyes slowly. Still, nothing on the screen in front of him. No name, no welcome. Just a muted glow and a spinning icon that looked like it was still buffering. He tapped it once, but the screen blinked back to the same generic greeting, guest. There was no glitch, just neglect. He turned his head slightly and caught a glimpse of the row across the aisle. The suited man, Mr. Dalton, had already been given a second glass of champagne and a warm greeting from another crew member. His name had been spoken 3 times before takeoff. Keanu remained quiet. He wasn't here for recognition. He had booked this flight not for a film premiere or press tour, but to attend a closed-door conference on global digital access. No press, no photographers. Just a room full of thinkers trying to solve a problem most people didn't even know existed. But even before reaching Geneva, the problem had already found him here, At 35,000 feet, before the plane had even left the runway, he reached for the small device tucked into the side of his jacket. It looked like an e-reader, dark and unassuming. With one gentle tap, the screen came alive. A single message appeared. "M Sentinel ready. Begin observational sync." He tapped yes. The device began scanning the cabin, calibrating proximity sensors and ambient tone. Its job wasn't to record conversations. It was built to detect bias, subtle behavior mapping through facial recognition, gesture analysis, and voice inflection. A technology years in the making, quietly funded by Keanu and a team of behavioral scientists who believed data could expose what politics couldn't. He had tested it before, once at a gala, once during a hotel check-in, but this flight felt different. This wasn't about grand gestures or obvious disrespect. This was about quiet omission. A language of exclusion whispered behind silk curtains and silver cutlery. The tray passed again. This time it carried a small dish of amuse-bouche, tiny hors d'oeuvres balanced on porcelain plates. The attendant leaned gently toward the man in 1C. "Truffle foam with caviar pearls, Mr. Radcliffe, just as you requested." Keanu watched the interaction from the corner of his eye. No one offered him a plate. No one said a word. He adjusted his posture slightly, still not speaking, still not demanding. It was about watching a system reveal itself. The cabin doors closed with a faint hiss. Outside, the rain had slowed to a mist, streaking the oval windows with silver lines that caught the last rays of airport floodlights. Inside, the flight crew made final checks, moving efficiently through the aisles, heads bowed over tablets and checklists. Not one looked toward seat 1 Ampere. Keanu sat upright, his belt fastened neatly across his lap. His eyes returned to the device in his hand. The system had already begun mapping patterns. Heat zones were forming in the visual feed, glowing halos around passengers receiving frequent service, spoken names, extended conversations. His seat, 1 Ampere, was cold. Data points showed the absence of engagement. The system had no emotion, just the truth. The violin music changed. A mellow jazz piece replaced it, slower, richer, curated to relax those who belonged here. It played like wallpaper over a room that had forgotten its corners. But Keanu hadn't forgotten. He noticed everything. The tray that stopped 2 rows short, the attendant who skipped over him without blinking, the way laughter came louder the further it got from his seat. He reached again into the seat pocket and retrieved the envelope he had placed there earlier. Unfolding it slowly, he revealed a letter written in sharp blue ink. Just one sentence. "How they treat you when they think you're no one is who they really are." He read it once, then folded it again with care, sliding it back into the pocket. This wasn't just another flight. This was a mirror. A mirror held up to a polished system that convinced itself it was fair. A system built to serve the visible, the recognized, the familiar. A system that wrapped inequality in velvet and called it exceptional service. And he was about to make that mirror crack. The device on his lap chimed softly. A new alert appeared. Cabin observation level. Passive to active bias markers detected. Behavior anomaly rating, 42%. Early phase. Continue recording. He tapped yes. The hum of the engines deepened as the aircraft began to taxi. From the galley, Becky emerged again. Her heels clicked gently along the carpet. She walked past Keanu without slowing. Not a glance. Not a word. Her hands carried a tray of linen napkins, folded like origami. She stopped beside the man in 1D. "So good to have you with us again, Mr. Clayton," she said warmly. "Would you like a blanket before takeoff?" He laughed, said something about champagne. She leaned closer. Keanu didn't turn his head. He didn't blink. He simply tapped his finger once more on the device. Voice engagement, 0. Eye contact, 0. Name usage, 0. Another tap. The feed synced. In 1 Ampere, the man who was supposedly invisible had just begun to see everything. And tonight, silence wouldn't protect them. It would expose them. The aircraft lifted off with barely a tremor, the city lights below shrinking into a quilt of flickering gold, first class dimmed to an elegant amber glow. Champagne glasses clinked softly a few rows behind Keanu, laughter trailing like perfume behind the men in tailored suits. Attendants moved smoothly, practiced and polished, like dancers in a carefully choreographed ballet. Every step, every glance was deliberate. Keanu's screen still hadn't updated. It blinked occasionally, resetting between loading preferences and welcome guest. The only thing missing was sincerity. Even the welcome was a placeholder. He tapped once at the corner of the display. A menu opened, no name, no profile photo, no record of his loyalty tier. Just the generic list of entertainment options, flight tracker, and meal settings. He scrolled to meal selection. It was blank. He had confirmed his vegan meal 5 days ago. Not once, but twice. A digital receipt. A follow-up from the airline concierge, confirming special dietary requests. The system had acknowledged it. The database had confirmed it. But this screen, now pulsing faintly in front of him, showed nothing. He didn't panic. He didn't sigh. He simply tilted his wrist and opened the small black tablet resting discreetly on his lap. The screen came to life with a gentle hum. A private system, built for moments exactly like this. Morgan Tech Sentinel. He had co-developed it over the last 3 years with a small group of behavioral analysts and engineers. Its purpose was simple: to expose the invisible, to measure bias, not through accusation, but through metrics. Eye contact, tone inflection, time spent in proximity, frequency of name usage, emotional temperature of voice, all of it captured quietly, logged with timestamps and mapped into undeniable visual data. The program wasn't public. It was too early, too disruptive. But Keanu had tested it on quiet dinners, business lounges, gala entrances. It never lied. And tonight, on Flight 389 to Geneva, it had already begun recording. A prompt blinked. Engagement anomaly detected. Service frequency disparity. Cabin section, 1 ampere. Do you wish to escalate observation level? He tapped yes. The screen adjusted. A map of the first-class cabin appeared. Red and yellow rings formed in clusters around seats 1C, 1D, and 2 amperes. Becky, the flight attendant, had made 4 service passes to those seats in under 15 minutes. 0 passes to 1 ampere. 0 name usage. 0 acknowledgement. Just then, she reappeared. She stood beside him without warning. Posture rigid, voice clipped. "Hi there," she said with a forced smile. "I'm doing a quick check before dinner service. You didn't select a meal online, correct?" Keanu looked up at her, voice calm. "I did. 5 days ago. Vegan option confirmed twice." She blinked once, the smile still fixed to her face. "Oh. Maybe the system didn't update." Then she turned and walked away. No apology, no question, no attempt to check again. Keanu looked back down at his screen. Observation level, active. Disparity confirmed. Tracking continued. The scent of seared steak drifted from the galley, layered with hints of truffle butter and warm bread. 2 rows back, Mr. Radcliffe raised a crystal glass, smiling at something Mr. Malcolm had just said. Their voices rolled with comfort and entitlement. Keanu heard every word, not because they were loud, but because they were free, unburdened by awareness or consequence. A few feet away, Becky leaned in with ease, pouring another glass of wine. Her laugh rang out soft, honeyed, familiar. She bent slightly as she tucked a napkin near Mr. Clayton's wrist. Her hands moved with grace. Her eyes sparkled with practiced intimacy. Her presence shifted for them. They weren't passengers. They were the reason she performed. Keanu glanced to his left. His tray table was still empty. He hadn't been offered bread, or wine, or the standard pre-dinner amuse-bouche. The tablet on his lap glowed with growing certainty. Cabin interaction index, below threshold. Guest 1, ampere equals no engagement. He tapped the menu again, scanning the cabin overlay. The heat map shifted as Becky's service proximity lit up in glowing orbs. Seat 1 ampere remained cold, an empty shell of silence. She walked past him again without looking. Keanu shifted slightly in his seat and reached into his coat pocket. He removed a second object, an analog item in a digital world. A small, spiral-bound notepad. Inside were neatly written entries, past interactions, logged behavior, not names, not accusations, just patterns, notes from conferences, hotels, dinners, everything tracked with the same disciplined calm. He flipped to a fresh page and began to write. Becky, pre-meal engagement, none. Tone, flat, no acknowledgement of confirmed request. Dismissive. He paused and added one more line. Expected silence. Assumed irrelevance. He slipped the notebook back into his pocket and looked out the window. The city was gone now. Only clouds. A soft, endless white below them. A space that promised equality but delivered hierarchy in silence. The cabin glowed with luxury, but luxury, Keanu knew, had never been the issue. The issue was who it included and who it forgot. The device on his lap pinged again. Meal service update. Nearby seats served. 1 ampere bypassed. Timestamp recorded. He tapped a single button. The feed synced directly to Elise Grant's private terminal. On the 52nd floor of a dark glass building in New York, Elise's screen lit up with the first alert. She didn't need context. She had seen it before. Her system went to work. And Keanu? He stayed silent. Not because he lacked the words, because the system was already speaking for him. The moment the meal tray arrived, it would confirm everything. And tonight, he wasn't just a passenger in seat 1 ampere. He was a witness. 27 minutes into the flight, Becky returned. This time, she wasn't carrying wine or warm bread. She wasn't smiling with delight or leaning in close. Her tray held a single item wrapped in dull plastic, a cold sandwich. White bread, limp lettuce, a pale sliver of chicken barely visible through the film. Next to it, a plastic cup of water half filled and already fogging over from the dry cabin air. She didn't stop long. "I'm sorry," she said flatly, eyes never meeting his. "We ran out of vegan options. There was an issue with catering. This is all we have." She didn't wait for a response. No gesture of concern. No offer to double-check. No effort to find an alternative. Just the announcement of denial, spoken like a weather report. Dry, routine, forgettable. Keanu looked down at the sandwich. He didn't touch it. He studied it the way a scientist studies a specimen, as if this tray, this small square of plastic and wilted produce, held the DNA of a much larger truth. His screen pulsed softly. Bias confirmation. Triggered. Tier 2 incident logged. Cabin 1 ampere. He tapped to acknowledge. The system updated. Elise, already watching, would see the timestamp, the footage, the exact inflection in Becky's voice. She had said sorry, but the data said otherwise. Tone, 31% lower warmth. Eye contact, none. Response time, 2.1 seconds. Departure delay, under 3 seconds. Engagement rating, negligible. Compared to her prior service to Mr. Radcliffe, engagement rating, 88%. Duration, 41 seconds. Tone variation, warm, familiar. Touch proximity, within comfort range. Keanu breathed slowly, the tray untouched before him. This wasn't about hunger. This wasn't about being forgotten. This was about being ignored deliberately, professionally, as if kindness was a currency and he hadn't paid the right price. He leaned back in his seat, hands folded over his lap, and turned his head toward the window once more. The sandwich sat on the tray like a metaphor, unwanted, unloved, cold. 2 rows behind him, laughter returned. Champagne corks hissed, silver cutlery tapped porcelain. No one noticed the man in 1 ampere hadn't eaten. No one saw that a quiet storm had already begun. Because while Becky moved on to her next guest, pouring dessert wine and cracking jokes, she failed to realize something important. She hadn't just served a cold sandwich. She'd just activated the most advanced behavioral accountability system in private aviation. And the man she thought was no one? He had just opened the file. Becky's voice floated down the aisle again. "Mr. Radcliffe, would you prefer the Pinot Noir or the Syrah with your entree?" She was smiling now, voice light, posture relaxed. She leaned slightly toward the man in seat 1C, the stem of a wine glass held between her fingers like a performance prop. Mr. Radcliffe grinned and pointed at the Syrah. Becky laughed as if the choice had been clever. Her hand touched his shoulder lightly as she placed the glass on his table, and then she adjusted his napkin with a graceful flick. 2 rows back, mister. Malcolm was talking about his vintage car collection. Becky responded with practiced curiosity, nodding at just the right moments. She offered him a warm towel rolled tightly and placed in a small porcelain dish. Her voice dropped into a lower register as she addressed him. "We pre-warmed the towels for your comfort, Mr. Malcolm." He winked. She smiled. Keanu sat motionless. No towel had been offered to him. The tray table still held the cold sandwich wrapped in fogged plastic. The water was lukewarm now, half evaporated. No wine, no bread, not even a second glance. He tapped the side of his device. A new data capture loaded. Interaction frequency. Cabin section 1 ampere. 0 name recognition. Cabin section 1 ampere. 0 eye contact events. Cabin section 1 ampere. 0. The heat map shifted again. 3 seats glowed like coals. 1C. 1D. 2 amperes. The rest of the cabin flickered in varying shades of orange. Only 1 ampere remained cold. The device pinged once more. Trigger bias marker activated. Cabin 1 ampere. Keanu didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply noted the timestamp. Across the aisle, Becky returned to Mr. Clayton. She placed a dessert tray in front of him. Chocolate mousse, raspberry coulis, mint garnish. The plate was ceramic, the silverware polished. She asked if he wanted coffee. She didn't say anything to Keanu, didn't even glance in his direction. The moments passed like water down a drain, quiet, seamless, but never acknowledged. The cabin gave the illusion of perfection. Golden lights, soft music, curated menus. But beneath the surface, the structure was clear. Certain people were visible, others were not. Keanu watched her move between rows, fluid as a shadow. Her voice changed slightly with each man she served. Brighter with Radcliffe, softer with Malcolm, playful with Clayton. With him, nothing. He wasn't angry. He had seen this before. The silence of those who believed kindness was optional. The assumption that courtesy had a profile, and he didn't match it. He tapped his device again and opened the live camera overlay. Then he selected a new prompt. Begin timestamp sync. Becky Whitmore, engagement range. 1 ampere through 1D. Duration, continuous. The system complied without sound. Becky returned with a new tray, her posture straight, her smile perfectly intact. "Mr. Radcliffe, here's your truffle risotto. We made sure the chef didn't hold back on the black garlic this time," she said warmly. She chuckled at her own comment, then tucked a linen napkin just beneath his glass. Her voice dropped again, soft and confidential. "And we chilled your dessert fork, just like last time." He nodded appreciatively, barely glancing up. Behind her, Daniel, the junior flight attendant, carried another tray towards seat 2 amperes, where a woman in pearls was offered the sea bass. She was addressed by name as well. Keanu's tray remained untouched. No one returned to clear it. No one checked to see if he was satisfied or needed anything else. The food had already begun to sweat through the packaging, but it didn't matter. It had served its purpose. His eyes returned to the tablet. Timestamp comparison. Name usage ratio, 1 ampere equals 0. Divided by name usage ratio, 1C, 1D equals 9. Total words spoken to passenger in 1 ampere, 14. Total words spoken to passenger in 1C, 118. Voice modulation score, 1 ampere. Flat divided by score, 1C, 2 amperes. Elevated, warm, familiar. He tapped a new sequence. Capture audio sample. "Mr. Radcliffe, here's your truffle risotto." Then he played it back. Her voice was bright, personal, invested. He tapped the earlier clip. "We ran out of the vegan option. This is all we have." The contrast was undeniable. The first was melodic, the second, robotic. Becky hadn't failed to recognize Keanu. She had failed to value him, not because of his fame, not because of anything he'd done, but because she had already made a quiet judgment. One rooted not in action, but in appearance. A man in black, no entourage, no jewelry, no ego, invisible. And she was wrong. Back in New York, Elise was already syncing live voice analytics. She flagged the tone differential with a single click. The numbers didn't lie. Keanu sat still, watching Becky continue her choreography. She bent over Radcliffe's table again, gently picking up his empty glass, brushing non-existent crumbs from his armrest. Her tone when asking about his wine was almost affectionate. Then she stood and turned. Their eyes met for the first time. For a brief second, her expression faltered. Not fear, not guilt, just the sudden awareness that something about seat 1 Ampere wasn't what she thought. Keanu didn't blink. He didn't nod. He didn't speak. She looked away first and walked on. The tablet vibrated once more. Engagement event logged. First eye contact. Passenger 1 Ampere. Duration 1.3 seconds. No verbal acknowledgement. He tapped one final time. Submit segment to behavioral sync. Flag. Passive exclusion. Confirmed. This wasn't over. This was the beginning. The cabin moved forward in time, but seat 1 Ampere remained untouched. The silence surrounding Keanu wasn't peaceful. It was strategic. Around him, life moved like a machine built to flatter the powerful. The sound of ice cubes clinking into glasses, the practiced rhythm of trays being lifted and replaced, the low rumble of conversation, all of it orchestrated to make some passengers feel like royalty. But for others, it was a curtain, a veil, that muted their presence without ever saying a word. Keanu didn't need to be told what was happening. He had lived through variations of this moment his entire life. At the start of his career, they mistook him for the assistant. At galas, he'd watched photographers bypass him for louder stars. In boardrooms, executives sometimes assumed he was the translator, not because of anything he said, but because of how quietly he carried himself. Tonight was no different. It was just dressed in better lighting and leather upholstery. Becky glided through the cabin once more, her arms cradling a tray of desserts, French tarts, glazed figs, delicate chocolates. She paused beside Mr. Clayton and leaned in slightly as she offered him his choice. "I know the mousse is your favorite," she said with a knowing smile. He grinned and accepted. Still, nothing for 1 Ampere. Keanu's tray had not been cleared. The sandwich sat like a monument to everything unspoken. A polite insult served cold, wrapped in plastic, left in full view of a system that didn't expect to be watched. But it was being watched now. His device glowed with layered data. A behavioral heat map unfolded in real time, showing red clusters around 3 key seats. The closer you sat to privilege, the warmer the treatment. The further away from those assumptions, the colder the silence. And Keanu Reeves, seated in the most expensive seat on the aircraft, was registering the coldest of all. He opened the second tab, Behavioral Engagement Variance, Staff Member, Whitmore, R. The summary loaded. Passenger 1, C. Interactions, 5, divided by average. Tone, warm, divided by I. Contact, sustained, divided by engagement time, 172 seconds. Passenger 1, D. Interactions, 4, divided by average. Tone, elevated divided by name usage, 3 divided by body angle. Forward passenger, 1 Ampere. Interactions, 1 divided by average. Tone, flat, divided by name usage, 0 divided by body angle. Avoidant. He tapped, confirm disparity. Then, a new prompt appeared. Forward summary to ethics analyst. He paused. Not out of disparity. End. Clears. Hesitation, but timing. Because Becky had just turned around, she stepped forward and stood beside him. Her tray was now empty. Her posture, however, had changed. "I just wanted to check if you needed anything else," she said quickly. Keanu didn't respond right away. He looked at her not unkindly, but directly. "You've served everyone in this cabin by name," he said softly, "except me." Her smile twitched. "I didn't catch your name when you boarded." "You never asked," he replied. She shifted her weight slightly, her hand tightening around the edge of the tray. "Well," she said, with a breathy half-laugh, "some guests don't want attention. And some," Keanu replied without raising his voice, "just want respect." She didn't answer. He tapped the screen in his lap one last time. Confirm submission. Yes. A quiet audit had begun, and seat 1 Ampere was no longer invisible. The cabin had settled into its rhythm. Silverware tapped lightly against porcelain. Glasses clinked with soft toasts between executives. The jazz playing overhead had shifted to something smoother, lower, like it had been curated to help everyone forget they were in motion. Everyone except for Keanu. He hadn't moved in 20 minutes. The cold sandwich still sat in front of him, untouched. The bread had gone stiff at the corners. The lettuce inside had lost its color, wilted into a thin, damp layer. The chicken looked dry, curled slightly at the edges, a half-hearted protein tucked into white bread, like an afterthought. The cup of water beside it was sweating now, leaving a ring on the tray. It had been placed in front of him without ceremony. No silverware, no tray liner, no second glance. He kept his hands folded. He didn't eat, not out of pride, out of principle. Because the moment wasn't about food anymore. It was about what the food represented. The assumption that he would accept whatever was given. The belief that he wouldn't question it. The quiet suggestion that he didn't matter enough to warrant care. That he didn't belong in this seat, in this space, in this experience. Becky returned. Her steps were brisk, precise, her tray now carrying empty glasses and folded napkins from the seats behind him. She approached his row without looking directly at him. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice mechanical. "There was an issue with catering. We've run out of vegan meals. That sandwich is all we have." Keanu turned his head calmly. "I confirmed the vegan option 5 days ago. I have the receipt, a confirmation email, a text." Becky gave a tight smile. Sometimes these things happen. Then she turned away before he could say anything else. She didn't ask to check, didn't offer an alternative, didn't ask if he was allergic, didn't offer to speak to the purser or request something from another cabin. She just walked away. Keanu leaned back in his seat, the tray still in front of him. The sandwich hadn't moved. He tapped once on his device. Timestamp: 0 hours, 52 minutes, and 14 seconds. Passenger 1 Ampere, served incorrect meal. Crew response: dismissive. Engagement level: low. He added a manual note. No apology, no accountability. Response concluded before passenger finished speaking. He looked down at the sandwich again. It was no longer food, it was data. It was a symbol of how some people are served with grace, warmth, and dignity, while others are handed the bare minimum and expected to smile. And it had happened in seat 1 Ampere, a seat designed for power, influence, and visibility. But tonight, that seat had been treated like an afterthought, and the man sitting in it wasn't going to forget. Keanu adjusted the tray ever so slightly forward, not to engage with the food, but to make it visible. He wanted the image to remain in plain sight. A cold, colorless sandwich on a brushed metal tray in one of the world's most exclusive flying environments. It didn't need to speak. It was already saying everything. He opened the notebook again, turned to a fresh page, and began writing in sharp block letters. 1 Ampere. Meal error confirmed. Staff tone: dry. Exit before resolution. Eye contact: avoided. Food quality: poor. No apology. No substitution. No escalation. He paused and underlined one word: avoided. He could have pressed the call button, could have asked for a supervisor, could have raised his voice and reminded them who he was, but that was never the point. If the only time people listen is when you're loud, then the system only hears power. And he wasn't interested in playing by those rules. He tapped the device again. A new tab opened. Catering records. Flight 389. First class manifest. The passenger manifest showed 12 names. 9 of them had pre-selected meals. Keanu's name appeared as Reeves K, with the note, vegan, confirmed, 2x. The timestamp on the reservation matched. The confirmation email saved to his encrypted inbox. The system had received the request. The flight crew had received it too. It hadn't been forgotten. It had been ignored. And that, he knew, was the most dangerous kind of discrimination, the kind that hides behind a system, behind a smile, behind the phrase, "These things happen," because that phrase is where accountability goes to die. That phrase is how people justify indifference. The device pinged. Elise had received the sync. She didn't reply. She didn't need to. At Morgan Tech, they had spent years designing a model that could distinguish inconvenience from injustice. It tracked not just what was done, but how it was done. The difference between a delayed coffee and a deliberate cold shoulder. And right now, the data was speaking louder than any confrontation ever could. Becky walked past him again. She didn't look down. Her arms were full of glassware, and her face had returned to its default setting, pleasant, professional, vacant. She knelt beside Mr. Malcolm and asked if he'd like another blanket. Her voice was soft, her posture welcoming. She laughed as he made a joke about turbulence and taxes. Keanu remained still. He tapped the screen again. Audio capture, passenger 1D, engagement duration 43 seconds. Staff tone, warm. Laughter detected. Hand contact, affirmative. His own metrics remained unchanged. Passenger 1, Ampere. 0 name usage. 0 follow-up. Meal error, unresolved. Dismissal time, 4,3 seconds. He opened a new file on the system and titled it Case, Passive Service Discrimination, Subject Whitmore, Rebecca. He scrolled through the camera footage captured from the moment he boarded. Becky's eyes scanning passengers. Her immediate shift in tone when she reached those in designer suits. Her brisk, flat interactions with anyone who didn't meet her unspoken criteria. It was all there. Time-stamped. Logged. Mapped in full color. He tapped once more. Begin escalation. Draft. Forward to Elise for Tier 2 review. The sandwich remained untouched, not because he was waiting for a better meal, because he had already been served something far more important: evidence. The sandwich began to sweat. Condensation clouded the plastic. The lettuce inside had gone translucent, the bread curling at the corners. It sat there on the tray table like a quiet insult, visible, undeniable, and yet somehow still unacknowledged. Becky didn't come back. She circled the cabin, offering desserts and hand-poured after-dinner drinks to passengers she remembered by name. She touched shoulders, adjusted napkins, asked about wine pairings. She moved with practiced elegance, but not once did she glance toward 1 Ampere. Not once did she ask if the tray had been cleared. Not once did she offer a new glass of water. And still, Keanu remained quiet. Because the absence itself was the proof. He tapped the tablet again. Camera sync, active audio patterns, logged behavioral variance, 87% across first-class passengers. Direct engagement, passenger 1 Ampere, under 3%. The system fed the data in silence. It watched when no one else did. Elise's screen in Manhattan lit up with the update. She scrolled through the overlay of service interactions, her eyes narrowing as the patterns formed into heat signatures. One section burned bright with over-attention. One remained ice cold. She typed only 2 words into her field log. Pattern locked. Back on the flight, Keanu reached for his notebook again. He flipped to the same page and added one final line. Cold meal untouched. Staff never returned. Disparity confirmed, not through error, but absence. He placed the pen down and folded his hands once more. He didn't need an apology anymore. He didn't need a warm meal or a smile that arrived too late. He needed exactly what he had: the tray, the silence, and the truth. Because this wasn't about service anymore. It was about the quiet precision of being made, invisible, and the even quieter decision not to let it go unseen. Keanu adjusted the brightness on the tablet in his lap. From a distance, it looked like an e-reader. Simple, ordinary. But beneath its matte black screen ran one of the most advanced behavioral intelligence tools in private development, Morgan Tech Sentinel. He tapped 3 times in a specific pattern, and a hidden panel slid into view. The device recognized him immediately, unlocking access to a secure suite designed for real-time observational analysis. He entered a temporary key code and selected his location, aircraft, Flight 389 section, first class, Zone A, Observer ID, K. Reeves. Tier Alpha Access Sync. Source, Cabin Cam, 4.02. Audio Node 7. Engagement Tracker, V, 6.8. The screen flickered, then came to life. The camera feed opened to a wide-angle view of the first-class cabin. A live overlay appeared. Small icons floated above each passenger, tracking engagement patterns, staff interactions, and proximity metrics. Every movement was being mapped. Not just what was said, but how it was said. Not just who was served, but who was seen. Becky appeared in the frame. A soft white outline formed around her as the AI locked onto her face and voice. A waveform tracked her speech. A thermal map followed her path. Keanu tapped on her icon. The system generated a behavioral snapshot. Crew member, Whitmore, R. Passenger engagement ranking. First class, Radcliffe, 91%. Malcolm, 88%. Clayton, 84%. Passenger 1, Ampere, 17%. The system highlighted additional indicators: eye contact frequency, tone warmth, posture openness, engagement duration, even smile authenticity, based on micromuscle facial scans. All signs pointed in the same direction. Keanu tapped a separate icon. A heat map bloomed across the screen. Red and orange clusters represented high engagement zones. Cool blue marked areas of little to no attention. His seat 1 Ampere glowed pale gray, neutral, empty, ignored. He watched as Becky leaned once again toward Mr. Radcliffe, pouring him a second glass of wine. Her mouth moved in soft conversation. Her smile was wide. The system tracked her eye movements and noted repeated full-body orientation toward him. Keanu made no expression. He tapped once more. Begin data sync. Behavioral pattern. Live upload recipient. Elise grant priority. Level 2. Observation confirmed. From her office in New York, Elise's dashboard began to light up. She didn't need context. She didn't need explanation. She had seen the pattern before, but never this clean, never this complete. And this time, the system wasn't logging assumptions, it was collecting evidence. Elise stared at the sync as it streamed across her monitor. The interface pulsed softly with live data from the aircraft. To anyone else, it would have looked like abstract code or meaningless telemetry. But she knew exactly what it meant. Every red pulse indicated engagement, every blue zone, avoid, and seat 1 Ampere was silent both in the physical cabin and on the emotional spectrum. She activated the vocal tone differentiator. The system began comparing Becky's voice across passengers. It showed waveforms, subtle modulations, shifts in pitch and cadence. Then, it stacked them against Keanu's data stream. Becky's voice when addressing Mr. Radcliffe. Warm, expressive, with a frequency profile that indicated positive emotional investment. Becky's voice with Keanu. Flat, clipped, clinical. The system confirmed the disparity with a percentage score. Voice bias indicator. 73.2% disparity. She tagged the finding and added it to a new internal audit file. Behavioral report. FL 389 divided by Whitmore, R. Back on the flight, Keanu continued to monitor the cabin as the AI constructed a second layer of data, engagement duration heat maps. Each time Becky stopped at a seat, the system logged the number of seconds she spent speaking, how many words were exchanged, and whether physical proximity had been initiated. The map displayed it clearly. Mr. Radcliffe, 52 seconds. Mr. Malcolm, 47 seconds. Mr. Radcliffe, 44 seconds. Passenger 1 Ampere, 3.8 seconds. He tapped once more and selected Visual Discrepancy Comparison. 2 clips played side by side. On the left, Becky leaning in gently toward Mr. Clayton, smiling, pouring wine, her tone rich and courteous. On the right, her standing at Keanu's seat, stiff, impersonal, placing the cold sandwich without eye contact, her voice barely audible. Her body turned away before she finished speaking. He slowed both clips and ran the micro-expression scanner. The left screen lit up with markers for authentic emotional warmth, raised cheeks, softened gaze, slight lean forward. The right screen showed closed body language, micro-frowns, averted eye contact, and minimal speech variation. No anger, no confrontation, but a cold wall of passive indifference. This wasn't just poor service, it was targeted disengagement. Keanu tapped the final icon on his screen. Begin voice capture log. Incident entry 4. The system recorded the following phrases. Becky, we've run out of the vegan option. That sandwich is all we have. Keanu, I confirmed the vegan option 5 days ago. Becky, sometimes these things happen. Elise received the audio within seconds. She played it back. Her expression didn't change. She flagged the segment, dismissive closure event, emotional deflection, disengagement score, 91%. She added it to the case file. Then she opened a new tag and titled it Modern Bias, Masked in Service Protocol. This wasn't about one cold sandwich. It was about a system that had quietly taught its employees who to serve and who to tolerate. And tonight, they had chosen the wrong man to tolerate. Keanu folded his hands again and watched the reflection of the tablet screen dance faintly in the window beside him. He wasn't collecting evidence for vengeance. He was collecting it for change. Outside the aircraft window, the clouds parted for a moment, revealing the quiet curvature of the earth below. But Keanu didn't look out. His eyes were fixed on the metrics cascading down his screen. The system was building a behavioral profile faster than any human could interpret manually. Every glance, every spoken word, every omission, it was all being mapped. The heat map of the cabin was now fully active. Seats 1C, 1D, and 2 amperes glowed red-orange. Their zones lit up with consistent staff presence, regular engagement, and positive emotional indicators. Seat 1 ampere remained gray. Not cold, not hostile, just void. Keanu tapped into the interaction matrix, a tool few people outside of Morgan Tech had even seen. The matrix plotted interactions across 3 axes: time spent, emotional tone, and response depth. It formed a web of lines stretching from each passenger to each crew member. His connection to Becky was represented by a single faint gray line. Weak, short, with no variance. She had offered him nothing. No warmth, no curiosity, no service beyond the bare minimum. That wasn't neglect by accident. It was exclusion by instinct. The device issued one final prompt for the night. Data sync complete. Cabin section 1 ampere behavioral pattern confirmed. Begin permanent archive? Keanu tapped yes. The report was encrypted and transferred to the Sentinel network. Elise would now have access to every moment, every interaction, and every silence. She would compile the raw data into a comprehensive report and forward it to Morgan Tech's ethics division, which held standing oversight agreements with multiple global institutions, including Stratasair's executive board. Not because Keanu wanted someone fired, but because he wanted someone held accountable. Becky wasn't a villain. She was a symptom, a person who had learned how to navigate a system that rewarded selective warmth and punished neutrality with invisibility. He wasn't angry at her. He was watching the entire system through her. The tablet dimmed. He placed it gently back into the leather sleeve tucked beside him, sealing it with a quiet zip. The sandwich tray still sat in front of him, unchanged. No one had returned to check on it, not once. And that, in the end, was the most telling data point of all. He looked forward into the darkened cabin, where the others sipped wine and traded investment stories. No one knew what had just been recorded, but they would, soon. At 2:17 a.m. Eastern Time, a discreet vibration traveled across the hardwood desk inside a glass office overlooking the East River. Elise Grant was already awake. She never really slept when Keanu traveled. Not because she worried about him, but because when the data pinged, it meant something was happening. She reached for the device, a matte black tablet built exclusively for internal Morgan Tech behavioral surveillance work. Only 5 existed. Hers was number 3. The alert glowed across the center of the screen. Cabin 1 ampere. Data packet received. Flagged interaction ratio, 17%. Visual bias anomaly detected. She tapped once to decrypt. It opened immediately. A rolling reel of silent footage began to play across the screen. The feed from the cabin's overhead cameras blended seamlessly with the facial tracking software, highlighting expressions with color-coded outlines. Orange for customer-facing engagement, blue for passive response, gray for dismissal. The cabin attendant labeled Becky showed full orange engagement with 6 passengers, but one row remained in almost total grayscale. Elise narrowed her eyes. Keanu's row. She adjusted the playback speed, slowing to real time. Watched as Becky approached with a sandwich. Watched as Keanu spoke, politely. Watched as Becky turned away mid-sentence. Eyes already on the next guest. No tension, no hostility, but no recognition. Expected baseline engagement for first-class passengers, 82%. Elise whispered to herself, reading the benchmark from the Morgan Tech standard. She looked again, 17%. And not the first time. She opened the overlay menu and tapped into the flight history match, a cross-referencing tool Keanu had insisted they develop 2 years ago. It allowed internal analysts to track behavioral patterns of public-facing staff across anonymized video records, only accessible through encrypted judicial review. It was a controversial system, but effective. She typed the name, Becky K. The system paused, then populated a list. 9 flights, 6 international, 3 domestic. Of those 9, 4 had logged internal customer dissatisfaction tickets. She opened each. The 14th of July, Zurich to LA. Passenger felt invisible. The 29th of August, JFK to Sao Paulo. I asked 3 times for water. Others didn't have to ask. The 3rd of October, LAX to Tokyo. My name was never used. My meal was incorrect. The others received apologies. I did not. Each report was flagged by customer support. Each had been reviewed by a supervisor, and each was dismissed as inconclusive. Elise didn't need a jury. She had data. She rewound the footage to frame-by-frame analysis. Watched Becky lean toward Radcliffe and Malcolm with visible warmth. Eye contact, smiling, knees slightly bent in active service posture. Then back to Keanu, neutral, flat, disengaged. The disparity wasn't dramatic. It was quiet. But in behavioral science, that silence was deafening. She began building the profile. Header. Engagement pattern suggests subconscious bias. Subsection. Confirmed multiple incidents. Category tag. Service hierarchy. Racial and class implicit bias. She paused and typed one final line beneath it. Escalation level. Authorized. Elise opened the Morgan Tech internal comms hub and initiated a direct secure link with 2 departments, legal intelligence and ethics oversight. She marked the message as priority yellow, just below emergency red. The packet included the behavioral analysis, cross-matched reports, and raw footage. No editorializing, just pattern recognition. Facts. She knew how this worked. The system wasn't designed to punish people. It was designed to protect patterns from becoming habits and habits from becoming systemic harm. While the files uploaded, she leaned back and stared at the pinned photograph beside her monitor. It was a candid photo of Keanu, not taken from any red carpet or magazine, but from the day he stood in the Poto, Bronx Shelter's cafeteria, and washed trays for 3 hours straight. No media, no interviews, just him and a mop bucket. He wasn't tracking Becky out of vengeance. He was tracking the quiet erosion of dignity because he'd lived through it, because his mother had, because his sister had, because a single act of exclusion, repeated over time, became a wall. The upload dinged complete. A message came back from legal review initiated. We'll send findings within 24 hours. But Elise wasn't waiting. She opened a second screen and loaded Sentinel Trace, a proprietary behavioral timeline visualizer. It stacked passenger interactions like horizontal bars across time, color-coded by intensity and frequency. The moment she pulled up Becky's trace, the screen darkened except for 2 vivid lines, Mr. Radcliffe and Mr. Malcolm, burning orange and gold, high engagement curves. Keanu's line, by contrast, was flat, blue-gray, dotted only by brief flickers when Becky passed by. Elise began annotating. Note 1. No recorded eye contact. Note 2. No verbal acknowledgement of name. Note 3. Food service delivered incorrectly. No follow-up attempt to resolve. Each of these might seem small on its own. Together, they painted something undeniable. But what disturbed Elise wasn't just the data. It was the pattern of evasion built around it. In 2 of the 4 prior complaints, supervisory staff had marked passenger expectations unclear as the dismissal reason. In one case, the reviewer noted the complainant did not articulate a clear objection at the time of incident, as if silence was proof of comfort. Elise tapped her keyboard. Silence is not consent. Lack of protest does not equal satisfaction. She saved the note under section Cultural Response Deference, a term used in sociology to describe how people from marginalized backgrounds often underreport mistreatment due to social conditioning. She zoomed back out. On screen, the timeline now glowed with new notes, layered with patterns only algorithms could see, but humans had long felt. Her final input: submit to CEO Watch Q. Tag: field priority. The last step was simple. She opened her encrypted messenger and typed to Keanu directly. Pattern confirmed. Escalation authorized. Your instincts were right. His response came moments later. 3 words. Thank you, Elise. Elise didn't stop there. She cross-referenced Becky's current crew assignment with her upcoming flight schedule. 2 international flights and 1 regional leg in the next 10 days. She flagged the future routes for behavioral observation and inserted a soft monitor trigger through Sentinel's cabin cam partner integration. If anything remotely similar happened again, the system would escalate to red instantly. This wasn't about catching someone in the act, it was about preventing the next act altogether. Next, she drafted a briefing for human resources. The report was firm, not accusatory, rooted in the pattern, not the person. It included a recommended course of action, a structured interview with an equity auditor present, mandatory retraining on bias recognition, and a monitored probation period. It ended with a note. This data does not assign blame. It reveals harm. There is a difference. Elise knew the airline might resist. Corporate structures were notoriously slow to move on anything that wasn't a lawsuit or a PR crisis. But she also knew something else. Keanu didn't just observe to collect. He observed to change. Quietly, yes, but relentlessly. She checked the time. 3:42 a.m. New York. The city outside her apartment window was still dark, the street below empty. But her screen glowed with the data of dozens of people whose experiences were never meant to be noticed, let alone mapped. She scrolled back to the beginning of the flight footage. The very first frame where Keanu entered the cabin. Nothing about him was loud. No designer, coat, no demands, no entourage. He was dressed in a plain charcoal sweater and jeans, a black backpack, a posture that was respectful, not imposing, a man who had chosen to see rather than be seen. And Becky's glance, barely a second long, had passed over him, as if he were just another seat filler. That moment was now evidence. Elise clicked a small icon at the corner of the screen, Archive for Training. She labeled the file, Initial Micro-Bias Capture Case Study #212. That file would go on to train hundreds of new hires at the airline over the next year, not to shame Becky, but to help others notice what she didn't. Finally, Elise opened her personal notepad. It wasn't company property, just a document she kept for herself. A growing collection of moments where systems failed quietly and someone noticed. She added a new line. Flight 76 amperes. First class silence. 1 cold sandwich. 1 data trail. 1 person who didn't look away. She saved the note, closed her laptop, and leaned back. In another hour, the sun would rise. And by then, someone from the airline's leadership team would see the report, feel the pressure, and be forced to respond. Change had already begun. And it all started with what most people would have ignored. In the plush galley just behind the first-class curtain, Becky stood with her back to the coffee machine, swirling a half glass of Chardonnay in a stemless wine glass. Her voice was light, almost sing-song, as she nudged her fellow flight attendant Carrie with her elbow. "You know who's in 1 amp here," she whispered, as though spilling gossip at a bridal shower. "Keanu Reeves." Carrie blinked. "Seriously? Wait, where?" Becky tilted her head toward the front. "Right there. I didn't recognize him at first. He's like, so quiet, just sitting there like a ghost." She took a slow sip of wine. "Thought he'd be charming, or at least say something cool. But nope, total statue." Carrie laughed under her breath. "Isn't he supposed to be like super humble?" "Maybe. Or maybe he's just creepy," Becky muttered, setting her glass down. "He gave me this weird look when I offered him the sandwich. I mean, sorry, we're out of his little vegan thing. It's not my fault." She rolled her eyes and grabbed another wine bottle. "He probably expected us to roll out the red carpet. Guess he's used to people fawning over him." Carrie didn't reply, sensing Becky's tone had shifted from gossip to something more dismissive, almost bitter. Anyway, Becky continued, turning to the drink cart with a bright smile suddenly painted back on her face. "I've got Mr. Malcolm waiting on his 3rd glass of Pinot. He actually tips. Unlike 1 ampere." She disappeared behind the curtain, smile gleaming. In seat 1 ampere, Keanu sat without moving. His hands rested on his lap, fingers interlocked. The tablet beside him buzzed once, a quiet, neutral vibration. He didn't look immediately, allowing a few seconds to pass before glancing at the screen. The words were simple. Behavioral Risk Index exceeded flagged user, BEC 4781. Confirm escalation? Below it, a line pulsed in yellow, flickering between 84% and 89%. It represented the algorithm's confidence. Rating: a real-time synthesis of voice analytics, tone volatility, bias trend detection, and service gap deltas. Keanu didn't flinch. The cabin lights dimmed around him, casting a golden haze over his tray table. The cold sandwich still sat there, untouched, and now curling slightly at the edges. Another passenger laughed across the aisle. Champagne flowed. Becky's voice rose again, soft and flirtatious. He tapped the screen once. Confirm. Becky glided past Keanu's seat with a tray of chocolates balanced effortlessly in her hand. She didn't look at him. Her attention was focused entirely on Mr. Radcliffe. In 1C, the well-dressed consultant who had been telling a story about golfing in Dubai for the last 15 minutes. Becky laughed at the punchline louder than the joke warranted and placed a chocolate square gently on his napkin like she was handing over gold. "Only for our favorites," she winked. Radcliffe chuckled and patted her hand. "You're spoiling me," she giggled. "That's my job." Behind them, a toddler in business class let out a soft cry. The mother tried soothing him, bouncing him gently on her lap. Becky didn't even glance back. Her world was focused on the aisle she chose to see, one where the powerful, the charming, and the generous were her stars. Keanu, with his unreadable silence and unspoken expectations, had no place in that performance. In the galley, Carrie reviewed her service notes on the wall-mounted screen. Standard checklist, cabin temperature, beverage cycles, passenger feedback potential. Becky leaned against the counter beside her. "Did you see the guy in 3B? Becky said, changing the subject. "Total tech bro. Asked for sparkling water like he owned the plane." Carrie just nodded. Becky lowered her voice again. "I swear, they're all the same. Either you're throwing money around, or you're invisible." She paused, then smirked. "Like Mr. Hollywood, in 1 ampere, Carrie finally turned. "Bex, you sure you're not being a little—" "What? Honest?" Becky snapped. "Look, I'm not being rude. I did my job. Gave him water, gave him food. Not my fault he didn't like the sandwich." Carrie glanced toward the curtain. "He didn't complain, you know." Becky crossed her arms. "He didn't have to. That's the thing with people like that. They judge without saying anything. It's all in their silence. Makes you feel like you're doing something wrong when you're not." Carrie didn't respond. She tapped a button on the console and turned back to her own prep work. Meanwhile, in 1 ampere, Keanu stared out the window. The clouds below shifted like slow-moving rivers of white silk. But his mind wasn't drifting. It was calculating, remembering. Every missed glance, every averted eye, every dropped tone in Becky's voice when she spoke to him. His tablet hummed again. A confirmation from Elise. Dossier received. Pattern consistent. Awaiting final validation from oversight partner. He closed the tablet gently and placed it back in the seat pocket. He didn't need the final report to know the truth. He had lived it again. The scent of warm chocolate drifted through the cabin as Becky continued her rounds. She crouched beside an elderly couple in 2D and 2E, helping them adjust their trays, smiling warmly as she gently placed napkins on their laps. Every movement she made was smooth, polished. To the casual observer, she looked like the perfect flight attendant, attentive, courteous, elegant. But none of her charm extended past row 2. In 1 Ampere, Keanu remained quiet. His posture hadn't shifted in over an hour. His expression held no accusation, only quiet watchfulness. That made Becky more uncomfortable than if he had yelled, but she'd convinced herself he was sulking. Entitled, expecting celebrity deference. She'd seen it before, and she wasn't about to play into it. Some of them think the world owes them, she whispered to Carrie later in the galley, biting into a cookie she hadn't offered to the front row, just because they're on a screen. Carrie didn't reply. She'd grown more withdrawn the past hour, clearly sensing something was off. She had noticed Becky's pattern. Who got smiles and who didn't, who got sparkling water and who got tap. Carrie had served with Becky for months. But today, the imbalance was stark. Becky tossed her wrapper, dusted her hands, and headed back into the cabin with renewed cheer. She passed Keanu's seat with her chin slightly raised, unwilling to even pretend to care anymore. Whatever had happened earlier, she considered it handled. The sandwich, the eye contact, the expectations. She'd checked the boxes. The rest, she decided, was his problem. Back in 1C, Radcliffe asked for another refill of his Pinot Noir. "You're keeping me young," he teased. "You're doing that all on your own," Becky laughed, pouring expertly. A passenger across the aisle asked what dessert options were available. Becky listed them with flair, hazelnut mousse, tiramisu, fresh fruit, and recommended her favorite. She knelt slightly to speak at eye level. Her earrings shimmered in the warm cabin light. Her voice was melodic, and still, she never turned her head toward 1 Ampere. Carrie stood near the service station, watching the display. Becky's show, the studied favoritism, the careful exclusion. She hadn't said anything yet, but she wasn't smiling anymore. Back in 1 Ampere, Keanu's tablet lit up again. No sound, just the soft white glow. A new notification had arrived from Morgan Tech's behavioral risk matrix. A single line. Risk index threshold exceeded. Confirm escalation. His thumb hovered over the screen. He looked around the cabin once more. Passengers laughing, joking, comfortable. One man invisible. He tapped the screen once. Confirm. The tablet pulsed briefly. Data transfer began. Miles away, in a silent office, lined with soundproof glass and ambient lights, Elise Grant received the real-time escalation. She didn't blink. She didn't need to. She had expected this. As the footage streamed in, she opened a new folder, titled it Radial Flight 2173, Cabin 1 Ampere, and began assembling every second of Becky's behavior into the audit platform. Heat maps, eye contact records, tone deviation analysis, comparison behavior from past flights. The algorithm wasn't emotional. It didn't care about charm or smiles. It saw patterns, and the pattern was clear. On board, Becky made her final pass through the cabin with a tray of warm towels, skipping Keanu's row entirely. She assumed he was asleep, or sulking, or unimportant. She didn't know what had just happened. Didn't know that, in less than 48 hours, she would be asked to step off another plane mid-shift for a meeting she wasn't expecting. Didn't know her record, once spotless, was already being reviewed by 2 departments and a third-party ethics firm. Didn't know the man in 1 Ampere hadn't raised his voice once, but had changed everything. The room was cold, silent, and lit only by the ambient glow of a dozen staggered monitors. Elise Grant sat motionless in her chair, eyes locked on the central screen. Her fingers barely moved as they slid across the trackpad, scrubbing frame by frame through the cabin footage sent from Keanu's device. She wasn't watching as a passenger. She was watching as a pattern analyst. Every pause, every shift in tone, every look. She watched Becky bypass Keanu's seat, not once, but 4 times. She rewound the moment Becky served Radcliffe again, bright eyes, smiling lips, the soft palm on his shoulder, as she laughed at something unfunny. She looped it back, noting the exact timestamp. Then she cross-referenced it with Keanu's tray. Untouched, still missing items, never followed up. Footage from the galley told her more than Becky knew it had. The hallway audio wasn't perfect, but it was enough. She heard Becky's voice. Some guests expect too much. It was subtle, polished. A comment said with a smile, not a sneer. But the algorithm parsed the tone. Elise clicked to activate tone match. Confidence level, 97.1%. Category, coded disrespect. Phrase flagged, class-based dismissal. The software attached an automatic annotation and added it to the log. Elise kept going. In the next clip, Becky made another offhand remark in the galley. You give them a warm towel and they expect your whole soul. Again, no slur, no vulgarity, but the tone was all wrong. Sarcastic, condescending. Tone match flagged it again, this time with an 88.9% confidence match for passive exclusion with disdain. Elise paused. She had done this work for 8 years. She'd seen countless borderline cases. But this wasn't borderline. It was deliberate. Not loud, not aggressive, just a quiet erasure. A pattern of service that revealed more through absence than action. She switched to emotion map. The facial recognition heat maps were staggering. Passenger 1 Ampere Keanu had been avoided for over 87% of Becky's time in the forward cabin. Eye contact, engagement, and interaction scores all fell below 20%. Radcliffe, by contrast, held a 91% engagement profile. Even other passengers in rows 2 and 3 hovered at 70% and above. Becky had actively chosen her audience. Elise tapped her screen and began assembling the formal audit. Header, Behavioral Audit Report, Cabin Crew Member, B. Lennox Flight. Radial 2173. Date. Auto-filled. Cabin Class. First Passenger Concern. Non-initiated. Observed via automated monitoring. She began typing the body of the summary. The following footage, metadata, and emotion tracking analysis indicate a repeated and targeted behavioral pattern involving class-based exclusion and coded verbal contempt. While no explicit violations or discriminatory language were used, the engagement disparity between passengers, particularly toward passenger 1 Ampere, was extreme and deliberate. This is not the first report involving this employee. 4 previous incidents have been marked as unsubstantiated due to insufficient data. This pattern is now fully mapped. She paused and inserted a quote. Some guests expect too much. She let it hang there. No slurs, no shouting, just a single sentence embedded in a system that never forgets. She highlighted it and pressed log quote as coded language disrespectful. She returned to the first frame the moment Keanu entered the plane. Calm, quiet, no demands. He had barely spoken, but the system had listened. And now, the pattern was irrefutable. Elise continued building the case, not with outrage, but with precision. She opened the archive data stream and pulled Becky Lennox's service logs from previous flights. The system auto-filled cross-references from flagged patterns, high engagement disparities, uneven service logs, and minor but notable complaint records filed by marginalized passengers. She scanned them quickly. One from 6 months ago. The attendant walked past me 3 times before offering water. Treated others differently. Filed by an elderly black professor flying to a conference. Another crew member was overly warm to white male passengers but cold and dismissive to me. This one from a solo female traveler who noted the same row and class Becky had worked. No official disciplinary action followed any of them. Just notes. Insufficient evidence, unable to confirm tone, and low confidence match on bias metrics. But that was before Morgan Tech's newer behavioral analysis models had rolled out, before facial engagement heat maps became admissible, before tone match reached a 97% threshold. Now, Becky's record lit up like a constellation. Elise added a section to the report. Behavioral consistency across flights, confirmed. Risk index, spike, confirmed. Coded language confidence level, 97.1%, most recent. Historical patterns, aligned. Recommendation, escalation and direct intervention. She leaned back in her chair. It wasn't about punishment, it was about accountability. What Becky represented wasn't new. It was old, worn in, and rebranded with smiles and soft voices. It didn't shout anymore. It didn't call names. It simply ignored. It made people feel unseen, less than. And the system wasn't going to let it slide again. Elise activated the executive notification sequence, not the standard compliance path, not HR. This was different. She routed the report through the top-tier channel, Internal Justice Protocol, Level 1. Only a handful of users had access. One of them was Keanu. The subject line populated automatically. Subject, Final Audit, B, Linux vertical bar, Verified Pattern vertical bar, Confidence match, 97.1%. Below it, the first line blinked. Authorization requested for full internal escalation and review board initiation. Elise clicked Attach. The video clips, the audio files, the behavior maps, the heat signatures, the quotes, the cross-flight pattern logs, all there. She clicked Send. Then she waited. 2 minutes passed, then 5. Then her screen lit up with a new icon. Authorized. Escalation confirmed. Reply from KR divided by mobile device divided by private key ID. No additional words, just one signal, a green light. Elise knew what it meant. The wheels were already turning. The internal system had received the flag and was moving forward with the review. No more brushed aside complaints. No more low confidence dismissals. This time, the behavior was documented in full. This time, it wouldn't be ignored. And somewhere at 30,000 feet, the woman at the center of it all was still smiling, still laughing, still unaware that the system she thought she'd outsmarted had been watching and remembering every word, every choice, every time she looked away. The plane began its descent. The hum beneath the cabin shifted, subtly at first, as altitude gave way to gravity. Most passengers didn't notice, busy sipping the last of their drinks or flipping through movies they never intended to finish. But Keanu noticed. He always noticed the quiet transitions. His tablet buzzed softly in his lap, the vibration discreet, like a secret handshake only he was trained to recognize. The message was short, stark, clinical, full audit approved. Ethics team standing by in Geneva. There was no fanfare, no need for escalation, no flashing lights or blinking alerts, just confirmation. And with it, a slow and silent beginning to something far more impactful than any raised voice or written complaint. Keanu glanced at the rows ahead. Becky was now chatting with Mr. Malcolm again, pouring him a final glass of white wine with a dramatic swirl and a warm, performative smile. Her back arched just slightly when she laughed. She touched his shoulder once, a practiced gesture that blurred the line between charm and manipulation. She seemed to have a favorite in every row, just not in 1 ampere. She hadn't looked at Keanu since the first hour of the flight. That too was data. Meanwhile, in the seat beside him, the untouched sandwich still sat on the tray table. The ice in his water had melted hours ago. No one had cleared it. No one had asked. As the aircraft began to bank ever so slightly, the cabin tilted toward twilight. Golden streaks of sun licked the windows, making everything look expensive and soft. People began adjusting their seats. Some reclined to savor the descent. Others leaned forward to prepare for landing. Keanu remained still. The system in his lap was still running. Silent surveillance. It was no longer just monitoring Becky's engagement scores or her recorded tone. It was now logging flight-wide anomalies, missed safety checks, delayed responses, discrepancies in how fast champagne was poured in one row versus another. The kind of invisible details that human memory would dismiss but systems never forget. And Becky still had no idea. She moved through the cabin like someone who'd already clocked out in her mind. Her posture had softened, her smile was looser, less forced, now that the bulk of the flight was behind her. She passed a young couple in 2C and 2D and made a joke about the landing gear sounding like a haunted coffee grinder. They laughed. She winked, her voice carried easily down the aisle. But as she approached 1 Ampere again, she didn't pause. No smile, no glance, not even a polite check-in. She stepped right past Keanu Reeves. And that moment, her obliviousness, her assumption of closure was the loudest thing that had happened all flight. The plane's descent continued. Outside the windows, mountains began to appear, distant snowcaps, silhouetted against fading blue, growing larger with each second. The world below was preparing to welcome them, unaware of what this arrival would set into motion. In the front galley, Becky tucked her service book into the slot behind the beverage cart and straightened her blazer. She checked her lipstick in the reflection of the storage door, fixing a smudge with her pinky nail. Her smile looked pristine, untouched by consequence. She took a deep breath, satisfied. She still believed she'd managed the passenger in 1 Ampere. To her, the silence had been a win. No complaint, no confrontation. Just another passenger who eventually got the message. Keep expectations low. She had convinced herself that whatever awkwardness lingered was now behind her, that the man in 1 Ampere would step off the plane, vanish into the blur of arrivals, and never be thought of again. But behind her polished exterior, the system was building a case. Every smile she had selectively given, every drink she skipped, every minute she left a passenger waiting longer than another. The camera built into the cabin's forward bulkhead had been watching not just for safety, but for patterns, and patterns had emerged. In Geneva, the ethics team began preparing a welcome packet. It wasn't for Keanu. It was for the flight's internal review board, a sealed envelope containing timestamps, mapped behavior trends, comparative treatment analysis, and facial emotion tracking data. Becky didn't know it yet, but the audit had already passed the threshold. Her name was now on a watch list, not a punitive one yet, but one that flagged for sustained attention. The kind that didn't forget after a report was closed. In 1 Ampere, Keanu didn't shift. His hands rested flat on the arms of the seat, fingers relaxed, eyes half-lidded. He had learned long ago that justice rarely arrived in volume. It arrived like this: quiet, precise, undeniable. He reviewed the last message from Elise. Behavioral audit threshold. Confirmed. Auto-escalation enabled. Watcher tag applied. No need for another tap. The next steps had already been triggered. Becky moved toward row 3, making light conversation with a woman in a powder blue suit. She smiled easily, cracked a joke about how bumpy the landing might be. "You'll feel like we're riding a rhino down the runway," she said, laughing. Passengers chuckled. A few relaxed their shoulders. But even as she performed her final duties, even as she folded her hands and gave the pre-landing announcements with confident tone, there was something in her voice, a smugness that assumed closure. She thought the flight was over. She thought the moment had passed. She had no idea that her every word had been collected. Not because someone had wanted to trap her, but because the system existed to capture truth without emotion. The same system that might defend a wrongly accused employee or identify a quiet hero now stood watching her. And unlike people, it did not get tired. It did not flinch. Back in New York, Elise uploaded the completed file to the Central Behavioral Archive. A red flag attached itself automatically beside Becky's name. Not a termination, not yet, but it meant one thing clearly. The descent had begun, and not just for the aircraft. As the wheels touched down, Becky exhaled in triumph. She thought she'd won. Behind her, Keanu remained silent, unmoved. But the system had spoken. Geneva was waiting, and this time, silence wasn't surrender. It was the calm before the truth descending fast, with no seatbelt strong enough to stop it. The wheels thudded softly against the tarmac, and the cabin lurched ever so slightly as the brakes engaged. Passengers stirred, pulling blankets off their laps, stretching, powering on phones. The usual chorus of sighs and shifting limbs filled the space as the plane rolled toward the terminal. Becky stood near the galley, fixing her collar in the reflection of the small stainless steel cabinet. Her posture relaxed now. She gave a quick laugh to another attendant and whispered something about surviving another diva in seat 1 Ampere. They giggled like nothing had happened. She didn't look back at Keanu. He sat in silence, still in his seat, tablet now dark in his lap. The cabin lights had adjusted to a warm glow for landing, illuminating the weariness on most passengers' faces. But Keanu's expression remained unreadable. Not cold, not angry, just still. The crew began their routine, preparing doors, securing carts, offering plastic smiles to first-class guests. Becky grabbed a tube of lipstick from her apron pocket and headed back to the front galley to reapply it before final greetings. In the cockpit, the captain announced, "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Geneva. Please remain seated until the seatbelt sign is turned off. Local time is 6:18 p.m. The tone was cheerful, unaware. At Gate 4, just beyond the jet bridge, 3 figures in tailored black suits stood waiting. They wore no airline insignia, no national flags. Only small metallic pins that gleamed under the overhead lights, and one detail that caught the eye of any insider: the crimson edge of a compliance badge clipped to the man in the center, a symbol known among high-ranking airline executives as the mark of internal ethics enforcement. Not for security, not for safety, for silence breakers. The woman on the right scanned the disembarkation manifest. Her eyes paused on one name. As the aircraft door opened and the first passengers stepped out, Keanu stood slowly, gathering only his black canvas bag. No rolling luggage, no need. The steward closest to the door glanced at him, hesitant, as if expecting a complaint or confrontation. Keanu nodded once in quiet acknowledgement, but said nothing. He stepped into the jet bridge and walked steadily, each footfall deliberate. As he exited, the 3 officials stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves," the center official said, holding out a hand. "We apologize for Keanu's." Gaze was calm. His voice was quiet but unwavering. "No need," he said. "This was inevitable." The official said nothing more. He simply turned slightly, letting Keanu pass without further comment. The gesture was subtle, but to those who knew the system, it meant everything. Keanu's presence had already spoken louder than any formal complaint. Inside the plane, Becky dabbed her lips with a tissue, then turned toward the aisle, smoothing her skirt with both hands. She glanced out the galley window and saw nothing unusual, just the usual bustle of ground crew and transport carts. Becky stepped out into the first-class aisle, flashing her usual polished smile. The passengers were starting to line up. She leaned toward a man in 2 Amperes and joked, "Hope Geneva treats you better than the meal did." He chuckled politely, already distracted by his phone. She walked down the aisle like she owned it, stopping now and then to make pleasant comments to select passengers, only the ones who had smiled at her, the ones she deemed worthy of acknowledgement. Her tone was light. Her mood was upbeat. Whatever tension had existed earlier with the man in 1 Ampere was long forgotten in her mind. She hadn't noticed he was no longer on the plane. At the galley door, a junior attendant whispered to her, "There are people waiting outside. They look official." Becky raised an eyebrow. "Immigration? Number, no uniforms, just suits." Becky rolled her eyes and dismissed it. "Probably some VIP handlers. They always make a scene when someone rich sneezes." She didn't know that Keanu had already cleared customs through a separate corridor. She didn't know that Elise Grant had filed the report directly through the airline's compliance branch, bypassing the regional office. She didn't know that a red ethics badge meant the case had triggered Category 3 scrutiny reserved for patterns of systemic abuse, not just one incident. She stepped off the plane, straightening her posture as the last few passengers exited. Her smile was still fixed in place. But when she turned the corner into the jet bridge and saw the 3 people standing silently, not moving toward her, not greeting her, just waiting, her pace slowed. They didn't flash badges. They didn't introduce themselves. The man in the middle simply said, "Becky." Her jaw tightened slightly. "Yes?" "You'll be coming with us." Her eyes flicked around. "What is this about?" He responded calmly. "A behavior review." She crossed her arms. "You mean a passenger made a complaint?" His answer came slowly. "Not a complaint. A pattern. A recorded pattern." The words landed differently. Becky opened her mouth to speak, but no defense came out. No denial. No explanation. Her rehearsed confidence, something she'd wielded for years, suddenly felt fragile in the air between them. Behind her, the junior attendant hovered at the door, sensing something was wrong but not daring to interrupt. "We'll take it from here," the woman on the right said. Becky didn't move. Then the man added, "This isn't disciplinary, it's procedural, but we recommend cooperation for your record." Becky finally took a breath, nodded, and followed them down the corridor. Her shoulders were still straight, but her steps had changed, lighter, less grounded. Inside the plane, one of the last passengers still waiting to retrieve his bag leaned to a flight attendant. "Wasn't that Keanu Reeves in seat 1 Ampere?" he whispered. The attendant, unsure if it was safe to respond, simply said, "He deplaned early." The man nodded. Seemed quiet, but I saw the way that lady ignored him. Cold. Really cold. The attendant didn't respond, but his glance toward the galley said, "Enough." Back at the terminal entrance, the 3 compliance officers escorted Becky through a side door labeled "Authorized Personnel Only." No media, no noise. No scenes, just consequence. The corridor was sterile, too clean. Becky followed the 2 compliance officers without speaking. Their silence felt intentional, not rushed, not cold, just measured. Every footstep echoed louder than it should have. They passed 2 glass-walled offices, both empty. The third door stood out frosted glass, labeled Ethics Room 2 inches black font. One of the officers gestured toward it. Becky hesitated, then stepped inside. The room was minimal. 2 chairs, a small round table, a wall screen. On the table sat a tablet, already active, displaying her employee ID photo, her name, and a blinking red line. Mandatory compliance interview in progress. The door closed gently behind her. A soft chime followed. Becky sat down, trying to steady her breath. Her mind flipped through possibilities. Maybe it was a mistaken identity. Maybe a passenger misinterpreted something. She'd dealt with complaints before. Nothing ever stuck. She reached for the tablet, but before she could touch it, a voice entered the room from a hidden speaker. "Good afternoon, Becky." She jumped slightly. The voice was male, clear, and calm. Professional, but not robotic. "This is a recorded session. For transparency, your responses will be logged and submitted to Human Evaluation Team Delta. Do you understand?" Becky glanced around the room, searching for a camera. "Yes," she replied cautiously. The voice continued. "Your flight report from Los Angeles to Geneva on Flight 2971 has triggered a Tier 3 audit." Her heart dropped. Tier 3. Everyone in the company. Airline knew what that meant. Tier 1 was for routine behavior flags. Tier 2 for escalated passenger incidents. Tier 3? That was the kind of review that determined whether someone kept their job or ended up on a no-rehire list across multiple carriers. She swallowed hard. "I don't understand what this is about." The screen flickered. A timeline appeared, time-stamped screenshots from the cabin surveillance system. Her image appeared repeatedly, smiling at passengers in rows 2 through 5, refilling drinks, laughing near the galley. Then, frames showing her skipping row 1 again and again. A few of the clips played automatically, silent but damning. Then came her voice recorded clearly, during her galley conversation with another attendant. He had that vibe, you know, like he expected some kind of celebrity treatment. The brooding ones always do. Becky's stomach turned. The voice resumed. "Becky, do you recall who was seated in 1 Ampere?" She tried to keep her tone light. "I didn't look at the name, just another premium ticket." There was a pause. Then the voice said calmly, "Passenger 1 Ampere was Keanu Charles Reeves." Her breath caught. She blinked twice, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "Excuse me?" The voice repeated, "Keanu Charles Reeves." He boarded early, requested no special attention, did not disclose his identity. You spoke to him once when offering a menu. After that, your behavior was categorized as neglectful by 4 separate algorithms and confirmed by 2 peer observers. Becky didn't respond. She couldn't. The clipboard in her lap slid to the floor. Becky leaned back in the chair, her mouth slightly open. Her tongue stuck to the roof of her mouth. She felt like the walls had shifted inward. The name echoed again in her mind, Keanu Charles Reeves. She replayed every moment of that flight, now seeing them not as harmless acts of disinterest, but in the harsh glare of recorded evidence. Her hand twitched, reaching again for the tablet, but it now displayed only a single word: observe. The voice spoke again. Becky, the systems did not flag your tone as overtly hostile. There were no slurs, no raised voice, no physical aggression. However, you were recorded omitting service to passenger 1 Ampere during standard touchpoints. You were observed providing extra attention to others while bypassing his row entirely. She tried to justify it, stumbling over her own defense. I wasn't avoiding him. I thought he wanted privacy. Some of them, they act like they don't want to be talked to. I was just giving him space. There was a pause, then another screen activated side-by-side footage. Her friendly exchange with a businessman in 3B. Her banter with a woman holding a baby in 4 Amperes. Her pouring extra wine for the newlyweds in 2C. Then silence in 1 Ampere. Keanu, seated alone, hands folded, eyes distant. He never asked for anything. But the absence of service was clear. The voice now came from a different speaker, slightly softer, female. Becky, our job isn't to treat people based on how much attention they request. Our job is to ensure that none of our passengers feel invisible. Becky's jaw clenched. I never made him feel invisible. The screen flashed again. Audio logs. Her voice in the galley. Some guests expect too much. The system paused the clip and highlighted the phrase. Underneath it appeared, confidence match, 97.1%, coded disrespect, class-tagged expression. Another clip played without warning Elisa's quiet tone in the background as she reviewed the footage. Targeted neglect, repeated pattern, modern discrimination, no slurs, just exclusion. Becky flinched. Wait, who is Elise? The male voice returned. She is part of the AI Human Audit Interface team, and this case bypassed internal compliance. Becky's eyes widened. Bypassed? Another silence. Then, this case was routed to executive ethics due to the C-Bowl. Passengers' public status and the incident's alignment with systemic indicators were tracking across flights. Becky stood up. This is crazy. You're acting like I committed a hate crime. No, Becky, the female voice replied. This is not about crime. This is about culture. It's about recognizing that passive exclusion hurts people just as much as open hostility. It's about patterns, repeated ones. The silence returned. She could hear the hum of the ventilation now, the weight of those repeated clips, her own voice, her choices. The screen flickered again. The red text changed. Pending review, termination or rehabilitation track A. Becky sat down slowly. She didn't understand what track A meant, but she understood what termination meant. And suddenly, she realized what it felt like to be unseen. Her voice cracked. Can I talk to him? The screen dimmed. A pause. Then, he's already gone. Becky's shoulders slumped. The tablet powered down. The room felt colder than before. No applause. No final word. Just silence and her own reflection staring back from the dark screen. The office lights were dimmed, not for effect, but for focus. Elise Grant sat alone, the hum of processors echoing like a heartbeat. Before her, a mosaic of timelines stretched across 3 monitors, each thread tied to one name, Becky Harrow. Elise's fingers moved with precision. She wasn't looking for a smoking gun. She was building a map of behavior, of patterns, of silence that spoke louder than words. It started with data. The system had logged every in-flight interaction from the last 2 years. Passenger demographics, drink orders, response time, tone analysis, facial micro-expressions. She set the parameters, race, all. Cabin class, business and first. Attendant, Harrow B. And then, execute. The screen shifted. Red flags popped like embers. 14 documented incidents where passengers of color reported being ignored, receiving delayed service, or facing subtle verbal dismissals. All flagged, all unresolved. The system didn't miss what humans were willing to excuse. Case closed, insufficient evidence. That phrase repeated across 5 reports. Each time, a different passenger, a different flight. But the same explanations. Elise pulled them up side by side. One guest was told, "It's a full flight, we're doing our best." Another, "You must have misunderstood the tone." And yet another, "We found no discriminatory intent." It wasn't just what Becky had said, it was what she hadn't said. The warmth she extended to some and withheld from others. The smiles that never reached certain rows. The apologies that came too late or not at all. Elise leaned in closer. One report, buried deeper, stood out. It was from a year ago. A former schoolteacher from Atlanta had flown first class to San Francisco. Her name was Alicia Green. She had submitted a complaint detailing how she'd been skipped during the dessert service, even after politely reminding the attendant. According to her statement, Becky had looked her up and down, then laughed softly as she walked away. "I don't want anyone fired," Alicia had written, "but I do want someone to notice that I was invisible." That report had never made it to HR. Instead, it had been quietly logged and archived as no action taken. Until now. Elise whispered the phrase aloud, as if testing its weight. "No action taken." The AI scanner chimed. New match. High probability link between phrasing across cases. Same script, same tone, same outcome. She clicked, correlate. And that's when the pattern exploded. 26 minor incidents. 10 repeat guest complaints. 3 employee warnings internally downplayed. All roads led back to Becky. The data was damning, not loud, but persistent. A kind of systemic drip. Not criminal in any single moment, but undeniable in accumulation. The algorithm calculated a phrase Elise hadn't seen before. Tag, modern discrimination. Confidence, 99.8%. She didn't need the percentage. She could feel it. Elise opened a deeper audit protocol. This time, the algorithm traced interactions not just by passenger demographics, but also by speech pattern analysis. A tool originally designed to detect potential security threats was now repurposed to detect something far more insidious, habitual microaggressions. And Becky's record lit up like a flare. Each flagged audio clip was paired with sentiment scoring. The AI assigned weight to tonal sharpness, stress pitch, and linguistic polarity. Elise clicked on one labeled Flight 382, Seattle to Boston. It was only 13 seconds long. Passenger, "Excuse me, I think you missed my row." Becky, "Some passengers think they're more important than others." There was no curse word, no slur, just a clipped tone, and a subtle implication. Elise clicked on another. Passenger, "Could I ask for a blanket, please?" "We've already provided the standard service, sir." The AI tagged the phrase standard service as coded. Indifference, a term often used when an employee was dismissing additional needs without overt hostility. Becky hadn't shouted. She hadn't insulted anyone by name. But her pattern was clear deflection through formality and dismissiveness cloaked in professionalism. The timeline now stretched across Elise's entire screen. She stared at the markers: red for flagged tone, orange for visual microaggression, yellow for passive neglect. There were more red flags on Becky's record than any other cabin crew member on the database. One interaction caught Elise off guard. It was an internal memo from nearly 18 months ago. Becky had filed a response to a complaint stating, "This passenger was visibly oversensitive and appeared to be looking for something to be offended by." Elise froze. She pulled up the passenger profile. It was a young black woman named Tamara Ross, a marketing executive en route to a conference in Chicago. Her feedback had been respectful, noting that Becky had repeatedly served other passengers while skipping her row twice. She had asked for a glass of wine and was told, "Maybe if you smile." That report had been closed. The phrase, subjective experience, had been used as justification. But Tamara had included a quote in her final statement. Elise read it twice. Discrimination is not always loud. Sometimes, it's simply not being seen. The weight of it pressed into Elise's chest. She reached for her coffee, but didn't sip. Instead, she began compiling. Each incident, each memo, each passenger name that had once been a data point now became part of a greater narrative. The title of the report auto-generated at the top of the document. Harrow, Rebecca, Cumulative Pattern Review. She changed it manually. Subject: Modern Discrimination, Systemic Pattern Report. The internal submission path was already coded. Legal, Ethics, Executive Review. One last window blinked open. A message from her own supervisor. Short, blunt. Ready for Stratus Air Legal? Elise clicked reply. One word. Yes. She pressed send. Within seconds, the submission was logged. A red lock icon appeared beside Becky's name in the personnel system pending legal hold. Elise leaned back, exhausted but clear-headed. She wasn't just sending a report. She was closing a chapter that had lingered too long in shadows. Across the country, at Stratus Air Legal, an automated alert triggered a case review. The heading on the screen was unmissable. Modern Discrimination. Becky's past, once buried beneath protocol and plausible deniability, was now laid bare unalterable and undeniable. The system had spoken. And this time, it remembered everything. The VIP terminal at Geneva's private airstrip was eerily quiet that morning. Sunlight poured in through towering glass walls, illuminating the polished marble floor. A team of uniformed staff stood in anticipation, unsure why the usual bustle had slowed to silence. No press, no entourage, just one man waiting alone near Gate 5. Charles Edmonds, CEO of Stratus Air, checked his watch again, though he knew it was futile. He wasn't waiting on time. He was waiting on a reckoning. Keanu Reeves appeared without ceremony. No red carpet, no greeting crew. Just a worn gray hoodie, dark jeans, and a black duffel slung over his shoulder. Calm, grounded. His steps were unhurried, measured. Charles moved forward quickly, extending his hand with forced warmth. "Mr. Reeves, please, allow me to say." Keanu stopped walking. He looked at the offered hand, then back up at the man in front of him. "This isn't about me," he said, voice quiet but pointed. "It's about what you allowed." Charles blinked. The silence stretched. He withdrew his hand. "I understand," he said finally, voice lower. It's been a long night, and an even longer oversight." Keanu didn't respond. He wasn't here to comfort him. Charles gestured toward the private lounge. "May we speak for a moment?" Keanu gave a single nod. Inside the lounge, no words were spoken for a while. A tray of untouched pastries sat near the espresso machine. Keanu remained standing. Charles didn't sit either. "I read the report," Charles began. "Ethics flagged it within minutes. Facial recognition, tone analysis, crew behavior tracking our systems. They knew. They just didn't act fast enough." "Not just this flight," Keanu said calmly. "The system flagged her years ago. You buried it, or ignored it." Charles didn't deny it. "We called it minor infractions," he said. "Poor hospitality, inconsistent service, subjective complaints. But none of it ever rose to the level of formal disciplinary action. Not enough to fire someone, not with the union, but enough to harm," Keanu said. "Enough to let someone like Becky feel invincible. Enough to make people invisible." Charles exhaled slowly. "The system has changed," he said. "It's smarter now. Elise's audit made sure of that. This morning, her findings triggered something I'd never seen before. Automatic escalation to legal and executive review. The badge-level ethics team pulled everything. It's bad." Keanu's eyes narrowed, but his face remained unreadable. "Why do I matter now?" he asked. "Because I'm famous?" "No," Charles replied. "Because this time, the system backed up the truth, and because this time, the target spoke back." There was a silence again, heavier than before. Keanu turned toward the window. Outside, baggage handlers moved around a nearby jet. A mother held her toddler up to see the planes, both of them laughing softly through the glass. "You know what she said in the galley?" Keanu asked without turning back. She called me creepy, because I didn't want champagne, because I didn't gush. Charles looked stunned. She didn't know, Keanu said, still watching the tarmac. She assumed, and she dismissed. Charles rubbed his temples. The weight of the truth was finally sinking in. It wasn't just about one employee, one mistake, one flight. It was about the entire culture that had grown beneath his leadership, one that let certain faces be overlooked and others be scrutinized. I've spent the last 12 hours reviewing our records, Charles admitted. Becky's file goes back 8 years. Her performance ratings were always average, but the pattern was there. Passengers of color received less engagement, fewer upgrades, more complaints. She dismissed most of them with the same phrase, passenger was hostile or unresponsive. Keanu turned slightly, meeting his eyes for the first time since the lounge began. And no one caught it? They did, Charles said. Frontline managers flagged her twice, but the reports were minimized. They said her attitude was a training issue, not a threat. And now? Keanu asked. Now it's categorized under modern discrimination, Charles replied. Subtle bias in customer service. Elise traced it using AI-assisted clustering. All the buried complaints, the unexplained seat skips, the passive-aggressive notes, it's undeniable now. The system picked up what people refused to. Keanu let the silence linger again. He didn't look triumphant, just tired. You built a world-class airline, he said. You talked about equity in your interviews. You funded DEI training. But in practice, you let people like her make quiet decisions that hurt others over and over. You let politeness hide prejudice. Charles nodded, ashamed. Do you want her fired? He asked softly. Keanu blinked, as if the question didn't matter. I want accountability, he said. Not just her. For everyone who looked the other way. Charles hesitated. She's under internal investigation now. Ethics Room 2 handled the interview. AI compliance tagged her responses as deflective. There's a strong case. That's not enough, Keanu said. What are you going to do about the culture? Charles looked down. That was the real question. I don't know, he said honestly. I thought I was progressive. I thought tech could catch everything. But it's only as honest as the people reviewing it. Keanu stepped closer. Then start by making it public, he said. This incident, this audit, don't spin it. Don't hide behind policy. Let people know what really happened and what you're doing to fix it. Charles's face tightened. That could hurt the brand. It might save it, Keanu said. Not the version you've been protecting, but the one your passengers actually believe in. Outside the lounge window, the mother and toddler were boarding now. The child waved to the plane. Charles followed Keanu's gaze. I don't want that kid to grow up thinking silence is professionalism, Keanu said quietly. I want him to know it's okay to speak up when something's wrong, even if your seat is in 1 ampere. Charles slowly nodded. I'll call a press conference, he said. We'll release the audit, and I'll speak personally. No lawyers, no script. Keanu's face softened just a little. Then maybe this wasn't a waste of time. Charles extended his hand, but Keanu didn't shake it. Instead, he placed a folded piece of paper on the table. Start with this, he said. Charles opened it. It read, Every seat tells a story. Make sure yours is worth sitting in. Then Keanu walked away, without a word. 4 days had passed. The scandal hadn't reached the headlines yet, but inside the polished offices of Stratus Air, change was no longer a suggestion. It was policy, mandatory, immediate. Ethics Room 2 had run its course. New modules were being installed across the fleet, and the senior operations teams had been pulled into back-to-back cultural review sessions. Some rolled their eyes. Most didn't dare. But none of that mattered now. The real shift was happening quietly at Gate 11 Amperes of the Geneva terminal, where a luxury Stratus jet awaited boarding for its next elite transatlantic route. Boarding Group 1 was called, but the gate agent didn't announce anything more. She simply stepped back, and the automatic scanner turned from red to green. Keanu Reeves stepped through. He wore the same black jacket, the same quiet expression. But the energy had shifted. People noticed, not because of his fame, but because of something unspoken that now surrounded him. An awareness, a presence, The crew at the gate didn't greet him, not because they didn't want to, but because this time they knew better. Respect didn't always need a microphone. The moment Keanu stepped into the cabin, something was different. Seat 1 Ampere looked untouched, yet transformed. Its leather gleamed under the warm cabin lights. A freshly mounted bronze plaque was embedded into the wood above the window. No spotlight, no gold, just 2 lines, etched in clean, understated lettering. Reserved for quiet power. We remember you. The attendant nearest to him didn't speak. She simply offered a slight bow of the head and gestured toward the seat. Keanu sat down slowly. There were no cameras, no applause, no dramatic gestures, only silence, and a kind of stillness that wrapped around the front row like a soft wave. His name had already been logged into the seat's biometric panel. No scanning needed this time, no awkward pauses, no manufactured delays. Before takeoff procedures even began, a tray table extended itself in front of him, polished, clean, carefully arranged. On it was a white linen napkin, a full vegan meal chickpea cauliflower curry with warm rice, steamed spinach, and a slice of gluten-free bread, everything served in ceramic, not plastic. Nothing rushed, nothing careless. Next to the cutlery lay a folded note, handwritten on elegant white cardstock. No logo, no initials, just words. Keanu opened it. Thank you for reminding us. Silence is not invisibility. Power does not need volume. We saw you. Now we see others too. No signature. He folded the card back carefully and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Then he looked out the window as the jet rolled toward the runway. There were no more glances from crew members, no visible hierarchy. Every passenger received the same calm tone. The flight took off on schedule, but above seat 1 Ampere, the plaque remained. Somewhere mid-flight, while the cabin lights dimmed and passengers slipped into their individual silences, one of the newer flight attendants quietly made her way to the front. Her name was Daniela. She had only joined Stratus Air 6 weeks ago and had heard whispers about what happened on Flight 2023 from Vienna. No one gave her the full story, just cautionary fragments. Something about a famous passenger. Someone from upper brass got involved. Don't make the same mistake Becky did. She didn't know what that meant. Not fully. But the words had left a strange impression, and now here she was, standing 2 rows behind Keanu Reeves. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She had no clipboard, no agenda, just an instinct. Keanu looked up when he noticed her presence. No raised eyebrow, no questioning look, just openness, the kind you don't fake. Daniela took a breath. I just wanted to say, she whispered, thank you for how you handled everything. Keanu gave a slight smile. You weren't even there. I know, but people are learning because of you. He nodded once. That was enough. Daniela didn't linger. She stepped back into the galley with a kind of lightness she hadn't felt before. It wasn't that anything magical had happened, but that something heavy had lifted, something unspoken. In the crew break room in Geneva, before takeoff, there had been a new memo pinned to the bulletin board. Printed in bold type, passenger awareness is not optional. Humility is the new standard. Dignity is not negotiable. Underneath the memo were 2 photos. One of Keanu Reeves sitting quietly in seat 1 Ampere on the day of the incident, and one of the new plaque now installed above that same seat. Both images were uncaptioned, but the message was loud and clear. Back on the flight, Keanu leaned back, resting his head gently against the side of the seat. The folded card still sat in his inner jacket pocket, pressing faintly against his chest. His eyes remained open not because he couldn't sleep, but because there was something peaceful about being awake in stillness, surrounded by change that didn't need to shout. Across the aisle, an elderly woman who had boarded quietly during pre-check turned to him. You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you? He offered a soft smile. Yes, ma'am. She nodded slowly. I saw what happened. My nephew sent me the article. We all read it. He didn't respond right away. She added, it meant something to us, especially those of us who've been invisible for most of our lives. This time, Keanu didn't say anything. He just looked at her, and in that gaze was the full weight of listening. She turned back to her screen. No more words were needed. Above them both, the cabin lights flickered softly as the night deepened. The plane continued its course toward Los Angeles. As the plane began its descent, a soft chime echoed overhead. Keanu glanced out the window, the lights of Los Angeles glittering below. He touched the plaque beside him, then tucked the handwritten note into his wallet. Not for fame, not for legacy, just to remember dignity had finally spoken. The official email was short. No public memo, no press release. Just a quiet internal notice sent through encrypted channels to all Stratus Air personnel. Effective immediately, Rebecca Wallace has been placed on indefinite administrative leave pending formal review. Compliance standards remain in full effect. There were no capital letters, no dramatic tone. But among the staff, the meaning was clear. Something had shifted. Inside HR headquarters, the lights stayed on late for 3 straight nights. A new ethics protocol was being drafted, not a boilerplate training session, but something more alive, more urgent. Elise sat with her team cross-referencing compliance history, digging deep into data, watching subtle behaviors that once escaped scrutiny. The words modern discrimination had redefined their lens. No longer was misconduct measured only in overt slurs or catastrophic failures. Now, neglect counted. Patterned disregard counted. Silence, too, had weight. They built new modules, video reenactments of real in-flight incidents, anonymous voiceovers from former passengers, AI-prompted scenarios with branching consequences. One simulation showed a tired black father with 2 kids being overlooked for help. In the old system, no one would have noticed. Now, the red flag blinked within seconds. On the surface, nothing explosive happened. There was no grand press conference, no viral scandal. Keanu never made a single statement. No interviews, no social posts, no leaks to media. And yet, the ripples began. A week after the flight, a retired teacher named Miriam boarded a late-night Stratus Air route from Minneapolis to San Francisco. She was in seat 14B, window side, holding her arthritic hands together for warmth. She didn't expect anything special, but midway through the flight, a young steward named Luca brought her a blanket, unprompted. She smiled and asked if something had changed. Luca didn't explain. He just smiled back and said, "We're paying better attention now." In another part of the country, a Pakistani mother traveling alone with her toddler was escorted to her seat by a flight attendant who took a knee, tied the child's shoe, and offered a kid's activity kit without being asked. The woman wept silently into her scarf. These weren't grand gestures. They weren't even policies, technically. But the culture had started to shift. The company quietly rolled out an internal badge program, Eyes Open, it was called. Flight crew who demonstrated consistent awareness and care received silent recognition, a silver pin shaped like a tiny open eye worn near the name tag. No public explanation was given, but passengers began to notice and ask. At headquarters, Charles Edmonds, the same CEO who had met Keanu at the VIP terminal, authorized a sweeping review of recruitment pipelines and onboarding practices. Stratus began actively seeking candidates from underrepresented backgrounds. They expanded partnerships with community colleges and flight schools in underserved areas. No fanfare, no backpatting, just change. And then there was seat 1 Ampere. The ripple there was different. Passengers who sat in it reported feeling something they couldn't quite name. The leather seat remained the same. The legroom, the tray table. But next to the window, in small engraved letters beneath the cabin light, was a phrase etched with quiet precision, reserved for quiet power. Passengers began asking questions. What did quiet power mean? Was it a marketing thing? A tribute? The crew was instructed not to give official statements. But slowly, stories leaked never in headlines, but in whispers between gate agents and frequent flyers. He was in that seat, one attendant whispered to another, on a layover in Denver. The man who didn't make a scene but made everything change. Word spread not through drama, but through reverence. A subtle kind of reverence, a silent kind, like something sacred had taken place in Sate 1 Ampere, and no one wanted to disturb it. Meanwhile, Becky Wallace packed up her apartment in silence. Her badge had been deactivated. She had received an official envelope from Stratus Air marked Compliance Review Dossier. Inside was a printed timeline of events she barely remembered, marked in red, vague language, tone dismissals, disproportionate service issues. None of it seemed dramatic enough to ruin a career, but it was the pattern that condemned her. For the first time, she felt something gnaw at her from the inside. Not fear, not shame. It was smaller than that, more honest. Recognition. She sat on the floor of her studio apartment and reread the final page of the letter. It wasn't an accusation, it was a question. What would you do differently if you believed every passenger was watching the sky for the first time? Becky didn't know how to answer it. Across the country, Elise drafted a new training film. It opened with an aerial shot of an empty runway at dusk, lights blinking into fog. Then a single sentence appeared on screen. Awareness doesn't need applause, it needs practice. There was no narrator, just real footage. Crews helping elderly passengers, a flight attendant crouching to speak eye level with a young child, a mechanic checking a tire twice instead of once. A series of quiet truths. Keanu continued his life as usual. No statements, no tweets, no public endorsement of the changes happening. But executives noticed something else. In the following months, a surprising number of celebrities began choosing Stratus Air again, not for its luxury, but for something else. Word spread that the airline felt different, not softer, just more awake. One day, a poet named Daniel Sun shared a photo on social media. It was a simple shot of his tray table in Sate 1 Ampere. His coffee rested beside a small folded card. The caption read, "I didn't ask for anything. I didn't say who I was. I just boarded quietly. But they knew, and they saw me. Maybe we're finally learning." The post didn't go viral, but it was shared by writers, then artists, then human rights advocates. A ripple. No marketing campaign could have done it. No PR consultant could have engineered it. It started because someone chose silence over spectacle. Because someone understood that dignity didn't need a microphone. And slowly, the ripple touched more than just the passengers. It touched the way gate agents greeted travelers. It touched the way captains addressed the cabin. It touched the way policies were written, and even how complaints were logged. Sate 1 Ampere was no longer just a place, it had become a presence. At a quiet ethics symposium 6 months later, Charles Edmonds stood at the back of the room, unnoticed. A presenter gestured to a slide titled, "Symbolic Change in Modern Aviation." There it was, Sate 1 Ampere, a symbol of humility, not hierarchy. A reminder that transformation often begins not with speeches, but with silence. He didn't speak, he just listened. And when the applause came, it wasn't loud, it was respectful, knowing. The ripple had become a wave not of outrage, but of reform. And in its center, untouched by cameras, was the man who never asked for recognition, only decency. Injustice doesn't always show up wearing a villain's face. Sometimes it arrives dressed in polite smiles and polished uniforms. Sometimes it hides in clipped tones, in the way someone says, "I'll check with the front," but never does, or in the difference between a warm welcome and a cold sandwich. In the quiet corners of everyday life, where no cameras roll and no headlines form, dignity can be diminished in subtle, quiet ways. And it's there in the silence that the deepest harm often begins. Keanu never made a scene. He never raised his voice or demanded a public apology. He didn't tweet, post, or call a press conference. He did what he's always done. He let the moment breathe. He gave the system space to reveal itself. And it did, loudly, clearly, completely. When Elise opened the ethics file, what she found wasn't just one misstep. It wasn't just Becky's dismissive attitude or a single incident with a celebrity. It was a pattern. One stitched together by countless small decisions, all pointing to a truth long ignored. Her treatment of passengers wasn't random. It was systematic, layered with assumptions, and shaped by biases she may not have even fully recognized. But recognition is no longer optional. The systems we build now must include the accountability we once avoided. Charles Edmonds, the CEO of Stratus Air, didn't argue when Keanu interrupted him. He didn't list policies or offer excuses. He simply nodded. Because some truths are too big to cover. Some moments are too heavy for words. And when those moments arrive, silence, if carried with clarity, can say everything. The seat remembers now. Seat 1 Ampere is no longer just a place to sit. It has become something else entirely. It stands as a symbol not of privilege, not of status, but of awareness. It reminds every crew member that behind every boarding pass is a story, a history, and a right to be treated with dignity. It reminds every executive that silence, if left unchecked, becomes complicity. But if honored properly, it can also become a force of transformation. The ripple has started, not through headlines, but through policy, through handwritten notes left on trays, through moments where crew members pause and choose to offer kindness where they once offered indifference, through new checklists that no longer ask just, did we serve, but also, did we see? This was never just about one flight. It was about all the moments we pretend not to notice. The man who's always last to get his drink, the woman whose seat complaint is ignored, the child who's hushed rather than heard. It's about the flight attendants who follow procedure but forget compassion, the gate agents who smile, but only at certain passengers, the quiet rules we never speak but always follow. And now, because of one moment, one meal, and one man who refused to retaliate, those rules are changing. On the next flights, something subtle began to shift. A woman in a headscarf received her meal before she had to ask twice. An elderly black man, traveling alone, found a pillow already placed at his seat without needing to request it, like he usually did. A single mother with 2 toddlers was offered help with her bags, not questioned about whether she was in the right boarding group. These weren't grand gestures. They didn't make news. But for the people on the receiving end, they meant everything. They felt seen. That's how it begins. The quiet power of acknowledgement. The ripple effect of one moment where someone chose not to shout, not to shame, but to stand still long enough for the system to feel the weight of its own reflection. There was no press release announcing Becky's suspension. No dramatic takedown, just a quiet memo. A name removed from the roster. A note about new ethics training modules being required for all Stratus Air crew by the end of the quarter. But that memo did something else too. It signaled to every employee on the ground and in the sky that culture wasn't something written on posters. It was something lived in tiny moments. And those moments, once ignored, were now being watched. Seat 1 Ampere became a legend in the training rooms. New hires were told the story in whispers, not the celebrity gossip version, but the real one. A man was denied dignity, and without saying a word, he changed everything. The seat was polished daily, not for status, but for memory. On its tray table, a small plaque read, "Reserved for quiet power." Beneath that, 2 simple words, "We remember." Keanu continued to fly Stratus Air. He never requested the seat, but it was always ready for him. The first-class flight attendants, briefed now in the updated modules, didn't fuss or flatter. They simply served his vegan meal with quiet attentiveness. On one flight, as the plane climbed past 30,000 feet, a folded note rested beside his tray. The handwriting was careful, slanted, unsure. "Thank you for reminding us," it said. Silence is not invisibility. Keanu didn't smile. He just closed his eyes for a moment. He wasn't looking for recognition. He wasn't looking for a win. He was just tired of seeing the same patterns repeat. And for once, they didn't. What happens when dignity is restored in the places we least expect it? When a company built on schedules and systems suddenly remembers the humans at the center of it all? That's where change begins. Not in public speeches, not in viral videos, but in the decision to serve one meal with care, in the choice to pause before dismissing someone's discomfort, in the awareness that tone matters and silence carries weight. The ripple wasn't loud, but it was growing. Injustice often wears a polished smile, a pressed uniform, a practiced tone. But kindness shows up without warning, quiet and steady. Keanu never raised his voice. He didn't need to. He let the silence speak louder than outrage. And in that silence, change took root. Have you ever felt unseen in a space meant to include you? Share your story below. Comment with, "I've been in that seat," Or, I won't be silent next time. Subscribe for more incredible stories where quiet power becomes unstoppable. Because sometimes, the strongest voices say nothing at all.